Καλώς ήρθατε στο sips&seconds. Βρισκόμαστε στην υπέροχη μπουτίκ της Breitling εδώ στη Βουκουρεστίου. Έχω την τιμή να με φιλοξενούν και να φιλοξενώ τον Gianfranco Gentile, υπέροχο όνομα, πάρα πολύ εύγχο, είναι Ιταλός και είναι ο Head of Heritage για την Global Head of Heritage της Breitling. Το γνώρισα χθες το βράδυ σε ένα event στο κέντρο της Αθήνας και μέσα σε 10 λεπτά είχαμε συντονίσει αυτό που θα ακολουθήσει. Τον ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Ας περάσουμε τώρα στην κοινή μας γλώσσα. So, Gianfranco, welcome to sips&seconds. It's a pleasure, really pleasure to meet you last night, and thanks for having me here. So, for our audience who don't know you, you are a global head of heritage for Breitling and a new established collector, as you say, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for wearing a Napoli cap because I come from south of Italy, so of course this is something that doesn't pass unnoticed. Yes, indeed, I joined Breitling in one and a half year ago as a global head of heritage. I've worked through heritage management for all my professional life, so more or less for the last 15 years. I started in luxury and fashion, then I moved to automotive. I worked for Fiat for many years, and now it's nice to go to watches also because watches have always been a passion of my family. My father has been a watch collector even before that I was born, so there's always been watches around in the family from different brands, including Breitling actually. So it was a nice way to come full circle with this family passion, which has started from my father, but also took me because you know, I think here in Greece we do the same in every family. When you have some watch enthusiasts, every time there is a specific moment in life, you get a watch. So my father always donated me some of his watches. Yes, the first one was when I finished high school. Then I got another watch when I took my bachelor's degree, and then a third watch when I got my master's degree.
Nice.
So I had the opportunity, and then in the meantime, I also started to buy watches by myself. All of those were usually, I would say, recent watches or contemporary watches, and then now I'm starting, of course, to buy vintage ones. So the first one was a gold Navitimer from 1965, and now I just bought a beautiful Paul Router from Universal Genève because we have this new adventure to deal with, and also we just celebrated a few days ago in Copenhagen the 70th anniversary of the Paul Router, and I wanted to have a little piece of this huge history, so I'm very happy with my purchases.
Amazing watch. Yeah, it's nice to from the big companies to do stuff like that because you have a motivation to spend or invest 3 to 4 hours to learn about the history of each model. It's amazing.
You know, I mean, this is our job at the heritage team. When I joined Breitling, I had the opportunity to set up the team. Now we have 4 people working for heritage from very different geographical and also professional backgrounds. Not all of them are watchmaking experts, but this is something that you actually develop with the past. But we're taking care of many projects because this year is a very special year for Breitling. We celebrate 140 years, so we had many, I would call them cultural projects. We started by opening the first Breitling museum in Zurich in August. In May we started a huge traveling exhibition which actually started in Athens in Europe and which touched more than 25 countries all over the world. It will continue until the beginning of next year, so we've been in around 60 cities so far, because our idea was to bring the history of the brand not only to life, but also to the people that don't know it. So creating a museum was, of course, the first objective, but also then, thanks to these traveling projects, we can really reach people in their cities all over the world. And then there has been a new book published about 140 years in 140 stories. We have a blog on LinkedIn every month in which we present.
Nice.
Yes, every month we present a new watch or a character in the history of the brand. And it's an opportunity for us to actually offer the readers a deep dive into a specific field or theme. And many of our readers actually are not Breitling enthusiasts, so it's good for us that we actually have the opportunity to spread knowledge. This is what a heritage department does, actually.
Yeah.
And even, for example, for the event here in Athens, we were exhibiting new watches, but then we decided to curate a selection of vintage watches that are explaining to the customers what are the aesthetical and the technical choices that Breitling does today. Because basically, I would say the 90% of the Breitling range of today is actually inspired by glorious products of the past. And this sense of continuity is very much important for us.
Yeah, I think it's the legacy of the brand. Yeah, to keep those amazing complication, or even the type, even the look of the watch. That's just a teeny of look, and you can know that it's Breitling. It's amazing to keep it alive. And then for the watch enthusiasts, I think it's all these things, the blog, and because as myself, I really like to read something because it's heard, and I really like to read it.
Sure.
It's at least in my point of view, it's better.
And I mean, watchmaking is an industry that has been very conservative. So, I mean, the style, the aesthetics, or the technique of these watches that were born 50, 60, 70 years ago is still very much current today. So there's still an interest in having a look at them. In most of the cases, since these were done with less industrial way of producing, they could reach a level even higher than the one that somehow we can reach today in terms, for example, of fitting impressive complications into small dimensions of watches, because there was a lot of work that was actually done by hand by the watchmakers. But still, even 50, 60 or 70 years later, the tools that a watchmaker uses today on his desk are very much the same that the ones that his father or grandfather would have used at the very same desk a few decades before. And the selection that we decided to bring to Athens, of course, starts from maybe what is the most well-known field for Breitling, which is aviation. But then, at the same time, we also curated another part of the selection, which actually allows people to understand that air was only one of the three universes that Willy Breitling set for the brand in the mid-1950s, because the other two are land and sea. So, I mean, the fact that the Breitling of today is using these three worlds, these three universes, as we call them, is again a way to pay tribute to the past of the brand, which is a brand that not many people may know it, but invented or manufactured or patented some of the most important in the settings that then basically shaped the way the industry was actually doing watches. And the first and the most important one is, of course, the chronograph. There has been a huge evolution in the chronograph making since the beginning of the company. Leon Breitling, the founder of the company, decided to focus on chronograph complications since the beginning, and all through the first three generations of the owners of the brand, which were indeed the three generations of the Breitling family, there has been an evolution in studying this complication, which started as you may know, pocket watch with a crown that was also using the chronograph, and then the development of the single pusher in 1915, and then in 1934 the patent of the second pusher. So every person that now wears a chronograph at his wrist, not only a Breitling chronograph, is wearing actually a Breitling patent with the shape of the two pushers at 2F4 and the chronometry, which is great.
It's the thing because, you know, we the people that don't know this this kind of history behind they connect it's of everyone. They connect the chronograph with a separate brand.
Yeah, indeed.
Because I wear this brand, so chronograph it's this brand, and this is the story. And back, if you are trying to to actually read about the history of not the brand, but the complication, it's amazing because you're gonna learn a lot of different brands, a lot of different people, and a lot of different like.
But all the major brands in Swiss watchmaking industry have their own firsts, and they're all glorious. We have some of the most important ones, I would say, because not only, as I said, we shaped the chronograph as we know it today, but also, for example, the first Swiss watch that went to space was a Breitling in 1962. The first dive chronograph in 1957 was a Breitling. The first watch that went around the world in a balloon, 1999, was a Breitling again. So different models, different stories, a lot of glorious past, I would say, that really for us is a pleasure to present to the public at the museum, in the exhibition, but also here, while we speak. Shall we have a look at the watches?
Yeah, let's start this.
Okay, so we start with the aviation pieces because, as we said, those are the ones that that maybe the public is more used to know. And in order to do so, we have to start from a piece which is actually not an aviation piece, but which is the forefather of this genealogy, and it's the Chronomat, a watch that was patented in 1940 by Willy Breitling, and which has a very particular innovation. The slide rule, the arithmetic logarithmic slide rule, which is featured in the bezel. By moving the bezel, you could actually do arithmetic complex calculation, multiplications, division, and so on. And this would actually allow the wearer of the watch itself to have basically the ancestor of an electronic calculator at his wrist. That's why we call it the first smartwatch in history, 1940. And Willy Breitling was so proud of this patent that he actually put the number of the patent on the dial, and you can see the Helvetic cross with the number of the patent afterwards. Now, the word chronomat stands for chronograph for mathematician. So you would tell me, but I don't see a chronograph here. And that's why, that's because in later stages, in the early 1950s, Breitling decided to launch a version of the chronomat which wasn't featuring the chronograph. So it's a three-hand traditional watch, but still has the logarithmic slide rule around, and it's a beautiful one. It also has this very peculiar dial, which Willy Breitling used to call papillon, because it has this cross and two different colors.
The condition is...
It's a beautiful
place. Of course, it's museum but it's amazing condition.
Very nice gold-plated piece, and again very rare because it's a chronomat which is not a chronograph. But let's continue with the history. So, in 1952, so more than 10 years after that the chronomat was patented, the AOPA, the Association of American Pilot and Aircraft Owners, asked Breitling to develop a further chronograph for these pilots. So what does Willy do? He takes the chronomat with the same bezel, slide bezel, and the logarithmic slide rule, and transforms the slide rule. This is not a regular logarithmic slide rule, this is a flight computer. So basically, the Navitimer, exactly with the same technique of the chronomat, thanks to the rotating sliding bezel, would actually allow the pilot to perform up to 18 different flight calculations. So if that one was a smartwatch, this is a flight computer, basically, at your wrist. Yeah. And we are talking about 1952, so I mean, quite a while ago.
Amazing piece, man.
And the first editions of the Navitimer sport the AOPA logo, so this kind of two wings with a shield in the middle that you see, because those watches were actually done at the beginning only for AOPA. They were marketed and sold by AOPA as the AOPA Navitimer. So in the very first Navitimer, you don't even have the Breitling logo. Then there's a second would say the further evolution, which also sports the Breitling logo. And then when the partnership with AOPA was archived somehow, then you would have the famous twin jet logo starting from 1965. So that's 1952. And then just only 1 year later, imagine how much there was, how many innovations were done at the same time.
Yeah, it's too close. Yeah,
it's just happening like one after the other. Breitling launches the AVI, or Co-Pilot actually, which is, so we are in 1953, another pilot watch. This one is again in, amazing conditions basically. And the idea is that the Co-Pilot is the companion of the Navitimer. The two watches were actually marketed in advertising, in the same advertising. So those were two alternatives basically for the pilots. It's a more sturdy, a more rugged watch, somehow simpler versus the Navitimer. Here it's all about readability, as you can say. The numbers are big.
Yeah.
The sub-counter at 3, the minute sub-counter for 15 minutes, is even bigger than the other two in order to allow a better readability. The hand is bigger versus the other two. And then you have these indicators every 3 minutes that allows the pilot to understand how many minutes have passed, even if it's coping with the shaking, down to the fact that he's actually piloting a cockpit in the 1950s.
I can't get enough of this. You know,
I know. As you can see, I like it very much. So
yeah, it's. I can't get enough of this. Piece of history that teaching us this is a tool.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we call them a tool watch.
Yeah, and I love the the different the pushers that they have. It's
really beautiful.
Amazing. And if you put it here, no one
would say that it's 70 years old. I understand. I agree. And the nice thing about, of course, also the AVI has a rotating bezel to do the countdowns. And then just a few years later, a second take on the AVI is done. In the mid-1960s, the so-called panda dials become very, very famous. So wide subdial. This is actually also a Breitling innovation. It was introduced with the Super Ocean in 1957. The chronograph was having wide subdials. And so even the AVI gets updated, and then we go from a all black to panda dial. This one in particular is the version that we refer to as the Raquel AVI, because the watch was actually worn by the American actress Raquel Welch in the movie Phantom, 1967, where she plays an international secret agent trying to save the world from a nuclear threat. Now imagine in 1967, we are 1 year before 1968, seeing a woman wearing a male tool watch at her wrist. It was kind of groundbreaking.
Yeah.
This is beautiful again, and see this dial has what we call the double signage, so it has marked Breitling, but also with the logo of the Lip, which was one of the most important retailer of Breitling in France, and of other brands as well.
I'm also amazing condition, and the subdials is like.
It's a very nice piece, but one that I really like a lot and which is not so well known is the one that I'm going to show you now, which is called Unitime. And so far we have talked about watches for the pilots, but then Breitling in the early 50s, so because the Unitime starts in 1951, also takes care of the people that are not in the cockpit of the airplane, which means all the businessmen that are starting to travel all around the world, because it's the golden era of commercial aviation. So all the gentlemen that have to, and ladies of course, that have to travel in transoceanic flights to go from one side of the other of the world. So the Unitime has a beautiful complication because it allows the reader not only to know, of course, the time and the date, but also, thanks again to the rotating bezel, to set a second time with all the, there are 15 cities of the world listed in the external bezel. So just by turning the bezel, he could adjust the city and know what time it was in the second city where he was.
Amazing! It's one of my favorite complications. It's not, like a perpetual calendar,
no,
but
absolutely.
it's so nice to to see it, and the light gray map.
Yeah, that's super cool. You have the world at your wrist, literally, because
amazing.
you can see it at the center
Amazing.
of the dial. So that's super nice. And I always like to present these watches together because we always think about, okay, the pilot watches, but it wasn't only about the pilot. It was also about the people that were using the plane. So even for them, there was a specific watch. So those are all the air watches. Those watches were launched at the end of the Second World War, when finally the war was over and people were finally able to, to regain optimism and also to have more money and restart enjoying beautiful things. During the war, Willy Breitling was very much working with the Allied air forces and had a department which was developing specific tool watches for planes, as we said before. So all this technology, before going to the Navitimer and to the AVI, went inside the Premier, which has the same quality level of these watches that were developed during the war, but in a much more elegant shape.
Aesthetic, yeah.
Yes. So, as you can see, it's super classy. Look at the beauty of these hands in blue. It's a beautiful watch. Again, here, golden case. As we said, there was an interest for significant pieces, and it's I would say, simple chronograph with 2 sub-counters, but still a very nice one, offered in different sizes, but not only in different materials, because you could have it in gold and in steel. And what is interesting is that on the base of this watch, then Breitling started developing 2 of the most important complications that then became again a signature of the brand and that are still sold today. So the first one and the most important one, because it's one of the most complicated complications that you can actually achieve, is the rattrapante, as they say in French, or split second in English. This is the Duograph, which is indeed the king of the exhibition, I would say, most of all because it has a beautiful case in full gold, and I mean, it's difficult to find the words.
Yeah, it's
Waterproof pushers, I mean, and as you can see from the 2 hands that are actually splitted, as the word says, split second, this chronograph allows the user to actually time 2 different time slots. So you can actually pause the first interval and then start with the second time measurement and then restart again. And that's why you see 2 central hands for the seconds at the center of the dial.
amazing. To create this complication in, it's
in the 1940s,
It's
yes. It was really an excellence for Breitling, I would say. As we said, it's the chronograph maker, so the split second is actually an evolution of the chronograph, and that's why it becomes so interesting. At exactly the same time, so still mid-1940s, Breitling also launches the Datora, which is a chronograph again. In this case, we have 3 sub-counters. The Premier was offered with 2 or with 3 sub-counters. The interesting thing about the Datora is that, look at the dimensions still, it couples a chronograph with a full calendar. And so this means that the user, besides using the watch as a chronograph, can also know what day of the week it is, what month, and what day of the month. The day of the month is actually signaled in this case by the red hand that you see at the center of the dial. And talking about central red hands, I mean, Datora is super cool. Then we move to the last watch that we have here, which is the Top Time. We jump forward and we get to the mid-1960s, a time where actually young people were not buying chronographs anymore because they found that, as we saw right now, those watches were becoming too formal and somehow boring. So they thought that the chronograph was actually a tool for their fathers or their grandfather. And that's why Breitling decided to change the rules again. And he came out with watches that were as qualitative as solid in terms of mechanism, but that had a very much updated look. So look at the blue dial here, fantastic. And the very funky red central second hand. This is, among all these watches that are all beautiful, the one that I find more current. I mean,
I'm thinking about the ads that
came out.
Yeah, came out with this watch.
Yeah, you had all these boys and girls riding motorcycles, driving
with the gloves
with the rising gloves, and that's why we decided to use a racing bracelet on this watch, which is, I mean, again,
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, it's difficult to find another word. And with the Top Time, I think we close our little walk through the history of the brand. We are in the what is called the golden age of watchmaking from the 1940s until the 1960s. This is the period where most of the complications that we still use nowadays were actually developed, perfected, and implemented. So it's a very significant core time for the history of watchmaking and for the history of Breitling, because as you can say, the brand has had many products to offer over that time. So I hope I didn't bore our
No, man.
our
It was
viewers and that
fantastic.
they
fantastic.
enjoyed
And
the
the
ride.
transitions, it's like, it's perfect, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's really nice.
So I invite you all to start reading our blog since 1884, it's called. You can find it on the Breitling official LinkedIn profile. And then, of course, to visit us in Zurich to come and see the museum.
Yeah. For me, I'm for sure
You're
in
gonna
April,
come.
yeah.
Ah,
In April,
okay.
I'm gonna
And just for you
visit.
to know, the museum is not only located in the center of Zurich, so it's super easy to get, but it's also free of charge. So I mean, it's the
Nice.
tour is complimentary, and there's a beautiful, nice cafe where they sell Italian coffee, so you can have a nice pause after you're done with the visit.
Perfect. Perfect. I can keep one of these, right?
Yes, of course, for the next 30 seconds.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for having me here. It was a pleasure. And then we do it
My
with the
pleasure.
Breitling gloves.
Yeah,
so
but-
what else? What else?
Thank you.
My pleasure.